you do not understand white supremacy, what it is, and how it works, everything else that you do understand will confuse you. In all of these 9 areas of activity, economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. Anywhere on the planet, minute by minute, day by day, all of the time, all of the time, all of the time.
Okay, I'd like to say good morning, grand rising, whatever degree that you prefer. This morning, welcome to the April the 27th edition of the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. I am your co-host. My name is Mr. Bobby. To get in contact with the show, just simply dial 516-453-9921. And when you do that, make sure that you press the number 1 button, and you will get in line to have your calls answered by Mr. Fuller or even a VGQ. I would ask, ma'am, please, sir, that when you are connected, first of all, you can be heard, so you don't have to ask, can I be heard? You can be heard. I would also request, ma'am, please, sir, that you be specific in your question so that Mr. Fuller can completely understand what you're saying and give you an appropriate response to your question. I know that sometimes people get on and they kind of rant and maybe get off point. We all do to some degree, but I'm just going to ask you to try to keep it short and concise so that Mr. Fuller can answer your question. You can give a VGQ also, but it has to be, again, short, and we can keep the show moving. You can also Gmail me at the numeral 7, Mr. Bobby, BOBBY, at gmail.com. I cannot say that it will be read today, but it will also get in rotation, and it will be read at the appropriate time. The chat room is now open. You can get in there. Sankofa's in there, or A Sankofa. JJ's in the house, Morpheus, and looks like PRDZ21 is in the house. So, yes, you can do that, and occasionally I will get to read some of those. Okay, first of all, let's say good morning, Mr. Fuller. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
And, Mr. Fuller, how are you doing this day?
I'm still learning.
You are still learning. Okay, Mr. Fuller. Let's see here in the news. There's a lot of good things. There's a lot of things going on in the news. Let's start off with a Gmail. This comes from Rachel. Says this. She says, "Morning, Mr. Fuller. Can you review the types of administrative subversions? The list is in the 2016 version of the book on page 145. So for those of you who have the book, and the book is the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept. Hopefully that you have that book, but if you don't, Mr. Fuller later on in the program will give you all the instructions on how to get the book. So let's go to page 145, and let's see what Rachel is speaking about here. If you have it before I do, Mr. Fuller, go ahead and speak up. 46, okay, 145. Okay, here they are, yeah. Do you have it yet, Mr. Fuller?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And she wanted to know what they were.
She said, can you review the types of administrative subversions? There are 10. Anyway, she wanted you to review, let's see, can you review the types of them? Since there's 10, maybe why don't you do at least 2? Because I don't think we have time in this 2-hour period to go through all of them. But pick out 2 of these.
Right, that's area 4 on the label.
Under label, yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, I have listed, these are terms I made up, 10 types of administrative subversion that pertains in incorrect government, and that is administrative brutality, administrative detention, administrative espionage, gerrymander, administrative harassment, administrative royalism, administrative sabotage, administrative slavery, administrative terrorism, and administrative waste. Now, the reason I just say that these all come under administrative subversion is administrative just means something that you're doing and the way that you're going about doing it. And I just gave labels to it, but actually it's just ways of mistreating people in incorrect government. And I just put them under those labels for use on job situations where people can actually point out this is a form of administrative espionage or a form of administrative royalism. In other words, we're not supposed in the Northwestern Hemisphere to have a royalist government. So when you say administrative royalism, you're talking about people having privileges that other people don't have. And you'll find that on a job. And the strongest form of royalism, for example, is racism, white supremacy. So it's just ways of saying the same thing, which is what the whole compensatory code is about. Basically, in the entire book, I'm just finding ways to use words that are available to people in the English language to say the same thing over and over again, but in different ways for different settings where people can better communicate because they will use these type of words. If you're on a job in any kind of governmental situation, and everything is governmental, where people interact with each other, you say, well, you have to talk to the administration about that. You know, that's administrative. And what do they mean by administrative? It just means the way you go about doing things, which is the same as saying a code, a way of getting things done. So you just take certain words and attach them to other words, like take other words and attach them to administrative, and you go with that. Now I have a check mark by here too, because there's an error in the number 4, administrative gerrymander. There's an error in the table of contents. So you won't find administrative gerrymander in there, except it blends into all the other administrative things that are listed here, because all of them are interactive anyway, but you won't find the actual content of administrative gerrymander in starting with Area 4 in the label, even though it is listed in the administrative, in the contents of the book itself. And that was an oversight in the 2016 edition. But basically, in answer to the latest question, it's just another way of saying these are different ways that the white supremacists will subvert an employee of a particular facility. That's mostly what it's addressed to, who is of color. And you just point out, we might have some administrative subversion here. And so you can go to the book, 145, and you can pick out whatever you think comes closest to what's going on in a job situation that you're in. Because in the system of white supremacy, the white supremacists are always at work in every situation. So you just pick out whatever is making a problem, and you attach words to it according to what you think
is going on that best describes what you think is happening.
All right.
That shouldn't happen.
Okay, well, we hope that takes care of Rachel there, and we'll move on. Okay, let's go to area code 267, and that's going to be Justice Agent in Pennsylvania. Let's see if we can cue you in here. Let's see here. And I think that we have you on. Okay, good morning. And you are on with Mr. Fuller. What is your question?
Good morning, Bobby. Good morning, Mr. Fuller. My question comes out of the Word Guide on page 2.
Word Guide on page 2. Okay.
Yeah.
The Word Guide, okay. Page number 2. Okay, I have it. Do you have it, Mr. Fuller? Word Guide, page 2.
I have it.
Okay. What is your question there?
I've been seeing a lot of this behavior being imitated by the white supremacists, so I just wanted to make a report on it. And if you can elaborate on it for us more, Mr. Fuller. It's acutely ghetto impaired. AGI.
Oh, yeah, I see it.
Says, use this term to apply to speech and or action of non-white person whose behavior indicates that he or she is extremely dangerous to him or herself and others, white or non-white, as a direct or indirect result of the effects of the system of white supremacy.
Yes, sir. So, did you have a question?
Yeah, my question was, I'm seeing a lot of white supremacists use this behavior. So I'm asking you, could you elaborate on it more for us, Mr. Fuller?
What it just says, okay? The definition is acutely, the term is acutely ghetto impaired, or AGI, racial. Use this term to apply to the speech and or action of a non-white person whose behavior indicates that he or she is extremely dangerous to him or herself and or others, white or non-white, as the direct or indirect result of the effects of the system of white supremacy. So you find this everywhere. Black people are acutely ghetto impaired, and that's just a term that I made up. I call it AGI. And we are in a prison. What we call the ghetto is just a prison camp of what we call the so-called black community, which is no such thing as a black community in the system of white supremacy. That term should not be used at any time to describe where black people are, what their behavior is. There is no such thing as a black community. A community is something progressive, everything progressive, everything constructive. That's a community. A prison camp is not a community. And all black people throughout the entire planet in the system of white supremacy are prisoners of war. And wherever they happen to be, they are in a prison camp because each black person is in prison. So you are ghetto impaired, or you're prison impaired, which is the same thing. Ghetto is nothing but a prison. It's an assigned space. Assigned by whom? By the white supremacists, racist man and racist woman, to wherever non-white people are located. They decide where non-white people are going to be on the planet. So we are acutely ghetto impaired, all of us. Why? Because we're prisoners of war in an illegitimate system called the system of white supremacy.
Okay. All righty, Justice. We appreciate it. Your call. Don't be a stranger, my brother. Okay. Let's see. Oh, my screen went blank. Let me see if I can get it back up here. Just a second here. Computers. Okay. While I'm doing that, I want to say a special hello to JJ. Big greetings from the UK that he's posted in the chat room. And Emery Lumumba. Good morning. Said he's still learning, Mr. Fuller. Okay, let's go to Alpha the First, where it says, which uniforms matter? It says, greetings, Mr. Fuller. Recently, Mr. Fuller, a black male U.S. Army first lieutenant was pulled over in a traffic stop, and he was beaten and pepper sprayed by the police for not having a license plate. This happens while he was in his, quote, U.S. Army uniform, end of quote. Just this past weekend, 4 black males enlisted U.S. Army soldiers and were harassed and kicked out of a restaurant called IHOP, and they were in their U.S. Army uniform. Question. I have looked in the word guide for victims of white supremacy and cannot find a compensatory definition for the word uniform. Mr. Fuller, can you offer a compensatory logical definition for the word uniform? I ask this because many black people, including myself, are becoming confused over being insulted and beaten while wearing their uniform, such as work or military. They are not being treated with respect while in their uniform. Can you please clear up the question, which uniform matters? Thank you.
Well, in answer to the question, which uniform matters, the uniform that we were born in. In other words, if you're a person of color, you are a person of color. You have color in your skin. The color is dark. It's not white. It's not classified as white. If you're classified as non-white, non-white is a color: black, brown, red, yellow, beige, tan. These are the usual colors of people here on the planet in the non-white category. So that non-white category is the uniform. No other uniform is more important than that uniform. So a white supremacist, a white person, or all people are supposed to look at the dark skin of a person of color and say that's a person who is eligible to be dominated and mistreated by anybody who is classified as white, anywhere, anytime, in any area of activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, or war. So any other type of uniform, so-called janitorial uniform, nurse uniform, doctor's uniform, sometimes you say that a person with a suit and tie, that's a uniform called a business suit. That's what it's called. And when you get ready to be serious about business, you put on a suit and tie. People sitting around a table, usually that's the uniform. They come dressed to do business. And so they say a shirt and a tie is kind of an indication that you're ready to be serious about whatever it is you're fixing to do. And so that's a uniform of sorts. So you have what you call a military uniform. But for black people in the system of white supremacy, your uniform is your black skin. That's the only uniform that really counts. Anything else that you're wearing made out of some type of material or something like that, that means nothing. You're black. You're eligible to be mistreated by anybody classified as white, period, in the system of white supremacy which is the strongest and most powerful government in the world today, 2021, and has been as far back as anybody who is breathing now can remember, because they were born in that uniform, whatever uniform you have. You have a white skin, you're in the supreme category, and you are eligible to mistreat and dominate anybody who has the uniform of blackness or a color in people. Black, brown, red, yellow, beige, tan, any of the shades of black. Blackness or the shades of black. That's the uniform that makes you eligible to be mistreated by anyone, anywhere, classified as white. That's what white supremacy means. And that is the uniform.
Mm-hmm. So
it doesn't make any difference, what kind of insignias you got and what your rank is and all that. A black person, you don't have any rank. You're a prisoner of war. You're in captivity. You are the enemy, and I have captured you. So you're subject to the system of white supremacy, which means you're eligible to be dominated and mistreated, and should be. We have to understand that.
Yes, sir. All righty. 516-453-9921 is the number to get in contact with this show, or you can Gmail me at the numeral number 7, Mr. Bobby, BOBBY, @gmail.com. Chat room is open. You can also leave or join the conversations that are going on there, and occasionally I will read one. From the Gmail, this one, Mr. Fuller. This is from Mr. Mann, says this. If a non-white person was charged with a criminal offense, how could they argue that they was only charged due to systematic racism, white supremacy, as a defense without repercussions? And in Canada, the federal police, RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, were created to control black and indigenous populations post-Confederation. And just recently, the head of the RCMP admitted to systematic racism existing in the RCMP. How do I expose this in court without repercussions? Okay, let's go back to the first question. If a non-white person, Mr. Fuller, was charged with a criminal offense, how could they argue that they was only charged due to systematic racism, white supremacy, as a defense without repercussions?
Well, it's going to be repercussions in the system of white supremacy, so you just include that in your presentation of whatever the case is about. By raising a question, are we in a system of racism or not, Your Honor? Whatever the procedures are, if you're allowed to ask that question. I am contending that I'm in a system of racism, so that is the major factor in all of this, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because the government of the entire world is a system of white supremacy. So there's no way to be outside that system. There's no such thing as we have racism in this place and we don't have it in another place. You have racism everywhere, every inch of the planet. Every inch of the planet, you have racism. That's a dominant factor in all government, so-called governments, because it's not with one real government, and that is, in capital letters, the system of white supremacy on planet Earth here in 2021. So you can always bring that up as the dominating factor in whatever's going on, and then take it from there.
Okay. Then he said
it's going to, the repercussions will be, not in a system of racism. I mean, this is a court here, and we're not talking about racism. We're talking about this particular case, a case of property ownership or something like that, or a murder case, or a case of assault, or whatever the case might be. But then you raise the question, does white supremacy exist? Then the next question is, does it exist here in this courtroom right this minute? After you answer the first question, does white supremacy exist? Then you want to know, does it exist here? And then we go from there and just keep asking questions. Because the first thing you have to establish is, does white supremacy exist, and where and when does it exist? Does it exist everywhere, all the time? So these are questions to be asked at that time, regardless of what the situation is.
Okay.
Once the element of racism is open for discussion, once they allow you to talk about racism in that particular case. So you first have to get permission to talk about it, you know.
Yeah.
And then if you're not given permission to talk about it, you should ask, why can't we talk about it since it's pertinent to the case?
Okay. Second part of that question before we go to break, he says that in Canada, the federal police, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, were created to control black and indigenous populations post-Confederation, and just recently, the head of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police admitted to systematic racism existing in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He says, how do I expose this in court without repercussions?
You simply repeat what you have been told, that it does exist, and then ask a question. Should that be considered as a factor in this particular case that involves the person who is in court? If the person is of color, and even if the person is a white person, you can say, you know, the lawyers and whatnot can bring that up. Is racism an element in this particular case? Because we have reports that there is racism in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. True or false? And if there is, could there be some seepage of that, or could that be a dominating factor or a factor of any kind in this particular case, involving these particular people who are in this particular court at this particular time? Questions. So you go into the question mode and stay there. Now, the repercussions will probably come from statements that you make, but you didn't make that statement. You can just present that as possible evidence, newspaper clipping or whatever.
Yes, sir. Even though he says that he has, or that the captain or whoever, the head of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police admitted to systematic racism in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Wouldn't that be proof of that the head admitted that this practice has been going on?
Yeah, yes. You present it as possible proof, and if there's any semblance of it at all, I mean, I would present it as evidence.
Yes.
Or evidence to be considered, and then we go from there. And if they say, well, you can't, I mean, some, report that was made 20 years ago or 10 years ago or even yesterday or today. I mean, well, that's not pertinent to the details of this particular case. And then you raise another question. Why not?
Okay. Hold it right there, Mr. Fuller.
The whole thing is stay in the question lane.
Okay.
Because of what? According to the code, all problems are solved through what? The process of questions and answers.
Okay, we're going to leave it there as we take a break, Mr. Fuller, and we'll come right back to that because I want to ask you a question on that. You are listening to the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. We also call it the CRCS. I am the co-host, Mr. Bobby. To get in contact with the show, simply dial, punch in whatever, 516-453-9921. And please, ma'am, be sure to depress the number 1 button so that you can get in call rotation. Also, you can contact the show by Gmail, the numeral 7, Mr. Bobby, BOBBY, at gmail.com. And it won't be read today, I don't think, but I'll have it in rotation so that it can be read. The chat room is open and available for comments. I want you to know that so you can do that. All righty, I believe that's it. Oh, and by the way, Mr. Fuller will be speaking about his book in about 15 minutes. There were a couple of questions at the beginning of the show about that book, and he'll talk more about that, the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept, which can be, you can obtain it by going to producejustice.com, but Mr. Fuller will talk more about that. Okay, back to the question here, Mr. Fuller. You said that you used this word that kind of jolted me. It was said that since the person, the head of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, admitted that there was racism, systematic racism within the organization, you said that this person could submit it as possible evidence. And a reason why I ask you that is if this man said that, and this gentleman is saying, Mr. Mann is saying that this is what this person said, how could that be possible evidence when, according to Mr. Mann, this is what he said? He's just repeating what the man said. So that word possible evidence, it just kind of shook me up. Can you elaborate more on that?
Well, I mean, because it depends on who's coming in with the evidence. So if somebody mentioned that, if you're bringing that as a defendant, then you say, this is evidence, and yet you're going to use it because it's supposed to be used because this is evidence. In a court of law, you bring in your evidence. So you say, I have some evidence here that must be considered in this particular case, if you're absolutely certain. But if you're coming in and somebody said that or handed something to you while you were there, or you found out about it by reading some newspaper report, so you can still present it as possible evidence. But if you have an actual report where this has been accepted by the general population and by the courts and by lawyers and legislators, then you present it as evidence. In the Northwestern Hemisphere, they say that if you're talking about America, I've heard this over and over again. Of course, I don't know how official it is or not, but they call it may be just a way of saying something, but I don't know if it's actually something that's been ruled on by the courts, that racism is America's original sin. Now, I use the word America in a different context altogether from that. Mm-hmm. So I don't accuse Americans of doing nothing that shouldn't be done according to the code. But somebody has said that original sin, that racism is the original sin of America. So anybody can go into court and say, wait a minute, I'm presenting evidence here that America's original sin is racism. as a part of what I have to say in this court of law. And, of course, you would have to give your source of that. Is that written somewhere in some official document? Or is that just something that, that people have said, newspaper reporters and writers and preachers, but has never been officially recognized and put into law as evidence that racism is America's original sin? Of course, I wouldn't recommend that anybody would say that according to the code, because I come from a different perspective in the textbook for victims of white supremacy, that Americans don't even exist. So Americans can't commit an original sin called racism or anything else, because Americans themselves are yet to exist. They don't exist. Why? Because Americans are people that practice justice. And in a system of white supremacy, nobody can practice justice. That's a huge contradiction. That's impossible. So you can't be an African or an Asian or an American in the system of white supremacy, because Africans, Americans, and Asians are people who practice justice. And it's impossible to have justice and white supremacy on the same planet at the same time. Can't be done. You have to get rid of white supremacy, and then you can work on having justice, meaning nobody's mistreated. And the people that need help the most gets the most constructive help. But I hope that I answered that question without deviating too much. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Mr. Fuller, Mr. Bobby was disconnected prematurely. Can you go ahead and talk about your book while he comes back on the air?
Yes. Right. We're disconnected?
Yes, he was like he was disconnected by mistake.
Okay, so what should I do now?
Go ahead and talk about the book for a moment.
Oh, can people hear me?
Yes, they can hear you.
All right. The book, you can get the textbook for victims of white supremacy by going to producejustice.com. Producejustice.com. And what will come up on the screen, you'll see a 2016 revised expanded edition. You'll also see the 1984 edition. Sometimes people prefer the 1984 edition, or they want both books. However, the revised expanded edition covers just about everything that's in the 1984 edition. The book with a computer design on it, that's the 1984 edition. But it says right on the cover, the 2016 edition, right under the title is in the center, A Compensatory Counter-Racist Code. And then there's a word guide also that is an addition to the revised expanded edition 2016, even though the word guide came out in 2010 prior to the revised expanded edition. But all three volumes are there. I always say they are basically one book, because I say if you have one problem, try to put everything that you have to say about that problem in one book, because it's one problem. The race problem is one problem. It causes a whole lot of other problems, but if you can't solve those other problems until you get rid of racism. That premise is made in the beginning of the book to start with. You can't straighten out any major problem here on the planet among people without getting rid of the system of white supremacy and replacing it with something better. And that something better would be the system of justice. You can get the volumes by going to producejustice.com. And it's addressed to the individual person of what you can do on a day-to-day basis wherever you happen to be. The individual person, the individual non-white person.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All righty. Thank you very much, Mr. Fuller. Hopefully, we got the usual suspects might be in play here. But anyway, I'm back. I got temporarily disconnected, but I am back. So that means that you're back. Let's go to the phone lines, and let's go out to Long Beach, California. My brother, you are on with Mr. Fuller, and you can be heard. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Bobby. Good morning, Mr. Fuller. I'm still learning.
Sir.
My question for today is, I heard Mr. Fuller's on a little tiny YouTube excerpt not too long ago on racial shadowboxing, and how to avoid it. So my question is, could he expound upon what racial shadowboxing is and how to avoid it?
Racial shadowboxing is criticizing a non-white person rather than making your criticism of the white person who is a suspected white supremacist. Because non-white people in the system of white supremacy are subject to the white supremacists. So our behavior is manufactured by the white supremacists. So when you spend most of your time, or any of your time, or all of your time, criticizing other non-white people, you're not getting at the source of their behavior. My behavior, all non-white people's behavior, is a reaction to the behavior of the white supremacists. Now, I'm talking about all white people, but I'm talking about the most powerful white people on the planet when it comes to non-white people, or the white supremacists. They dominate non-white people in all areas of activity. The terrible things that black people do, and black people do some terrible things that should not be done. We say terrible things all the time. But this behavior is manufactured by the white supremacists. They are to blame for their illegitimate children's behavior, because that's what we are in the system of white supremacy. If you're a person of color, you're the illegitimate child of the white supremacists in an illegitimate government called the system of white supremacy. So when one black person, for example, criticizes another black person for his or her behavior, you're not really getting at the source of that behavior, the original sin of where it comes from, that non-constructive behavior. That comes from the white supremacists. So how do you avoid that? In answer to the question, VGQ. That's something that is in the code book described as Victims Guaranteed Qualification.
Yes.
That when that non-white person says something, or does something that shouldn't be done, or particularly saying something, correction. Now, when they're doing something, you just point that out. You criticize that as something that shouldn't be done, but you don't address it to the person. You just say, the code says that shouldn't be done because it's not constructive. But if it's something that a person says, and you are asked, for example, to comment on it, you simply say under VGQ, this is the fastest way to do it. Well, he said what he said. That way you don't get into an argument with the non-white person, because an argument is not going anywhere that's going to have a constructive result. Prisoners of war arguing about anything in the prison yard has nothing to do with removing the prison walls. They can argue all they want to. So what? They're both prisoners. So what are they arguing about? They can fight like prisoners do. But after the fight is over, anybody who studies what goes on in a prison, prisoners fight all the time, curse each other out, all kind of noise going on, all kind of animosity, prison gangs being formed. But all of them are still prisoners at the end of the day.
Right.
Because they haven't dealt with being prisoners. They're just working on each other, harming each other. So you look at all non-white people on the planet in the system of white supremacy as prisoners of war. So you minimize conflict by minimizing all non-constructive contact. That's what you do.
All righty.
Black people should only contact with each other on a daily basis in any area of activity when there's something constructive going on.
Yes, sir.
Or going to be going on.
Okay. Marquise, don't be a stranger. Thanks for your call, and we'll hit you up the next time.
I'd like to stay on the line as well, too. I'm listening.
I'm glad you said it because I was getting ready to cut you off. Okay. Thank you. All righty. Let's go to Brother Muko, and then we're going to get to David from Dayton. But you got to get to my man in here. Brother Muko. Let's see if I can get you in here. In his school, yeah, definitely get Brother Muko in. He's been in there for a long time. Sorry about that, Brother Muko. How are you? Good morning. How are you and your care unit?
Oh, man, Blacktastic, still learning as well. Mr. Bobby, Mr. Fuller, how are y'all doing today? I know y'all still learning.
Good morning, sir. All right.
Good morning.
I want to ask two quick questions. Okay, the first one, Mr. Fuller, is can you explain for my care units around the world, around the United States, the importance of being constructive, the importance of constructive behavior and non-constructive behavior, and that eliminating any middle ground in any situation.
Well,
and the second question.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'm sorry. And the second question.
First.
Wait a minute, Brother
Okay.
Muko. Let him answer the first question. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Fuller.
Well, a simple way of doing it, in my opinion, and it's on page 171 and 172, anytime you're talking to anybody, everybody has wants. Everybody wants something every minute. People have wants. Okay? Every minute people have wants. All creatures have wants every minute. Birds, squirrels, alligators, elephants have wants. Something you want to do or something you want somebody else to do. So on page 171 of the Revised Expanded Edition of the Code Book, there's 4 things, 4 questions. Because all problems are solved through the process of questions and answers, according to the code, according to logic. First question, what do you want me to do? If it's something that involves you. Why do you want me to do it? Second question. Third question, how do you plan for me to do it? Because you want me to do it, what's your plan for me to do it? You must have a plan, or should have. And the fourth question, what do you expect the constructive result to be? That's the question that's underlined. That bottom line question, what do you expect the constructive result to be? Starting over again. What do you want me to do? You want me to do something? What do you want me to do? Why do you want me to do what it is that you want me to do? That's the second question. Third question, how do you plan for me to do it? What's your plan? And fourth question, what do you expect the constructive result to be? And don't argue about the answers that you get. Just be ready for the next questions that you will have ready, if there's any more questions. But those 4 questions should do it. There should be very few questions after that. Those are lock-in questions. Those are questions that when you get frustrated, you can always raise in any situation, because people want to do something, or they want something done. They want to do something, or they want you to do something, or they want somebody to do something. So those are the 4 questions about wants. W-A-N-T-S.
Okay.
What do you want me to do? And you can ask yourself these questions. That's the best way to communicate with people. And don't argue about the answers. Just be ready with the next questions.
Okay.
Because those 4 questions should they should go right to the heart of anything. And that last question, what do you expect the constructive result to be of these things that you want done? All right? And just wait on the answer. Don't jump into the answer. Wait on the answer.
All righty. Brother Muko, what is your second question for Mr. Fuller?
My second question, Mr. Fuller, for my care units in Baltimore, especially D.C., California, especially Compton. Why it is important for every non-white person to suspect every white person of practicing racism.
It's important because...
I'm sorry.
You have something else?
No, I just wanted to say I wanted to stay on the line. Afterwards. Okay.
It's important because we are in a government, a world government, called the system of white supremacy. So, logically speaking, if we, meaning all of the people who are on the planet, are in a world government dominated by people who believe in something called white supremacy, then it's logical to assume from that fact that somebody, somewhere, is a white supremacist. But who is a white supremacist? How can you tell? White supremacists, or the refined ones, are very deceptive. They know how to hide their being white supremacists in what they say and do. They're greatly skilled at that. And there is no master list, as far as I know, of who is a white supremacist and who is not a white supremacist, as far as I know. Now, if anybody has access to a list, I would like to have that list so that I would know on a day-to-day basis when I would walk into an office building or a grocery store and whatnot, who, if there's anybody in there who's classified as white, who are the white people in there who are white supremacists and who are not? I don't know of anybody who can do that specifically. I'm quite sure that there are quite a few people who can in some instances, but I don't think that any person can tell on a world scale who is a white supremacist out of the white population of the planet and who is not. I don't think anybody has that much knowledge. They may have, but that knowledge hasn't come to me. So therefore, in answer to the question, it is correct. It's the correct thing to do for a victim of white supremacy to suspect that any white person who is able to be a white supremacist probably is one. Why? Because we have a system of white supremacy, and it takes a whole lot of people, participants, to keep that system going. People classified as white. But who is a white supremacist and who is not, I don't know. So I have to suspect anyone who is able to be a white supremacist probably is one. Until what? Until proven different. Proven by whom? To whom? Proven by me. By me. Proven to me. By me. Each and every white person that I encounter. Because I can't trust anybody else's judgment in this war against racism, which is where we all are. It's unfortunate, right, but that's the way it is.
Okay, we are coming up on the end of the first hour, so David from Dayton, Ohio, I'm going to get you in, but I'm going to get you in at the top of the second hour because I don't want to give you 2 minutes and then we have to change over, so I'm going to get you in at that point. So in the meantime and in between time, Mr. Fuller, with all this, you mentioned the word war just a few moments ago. It seems, but I have no proof of this, but it seems that a lot of black men, women, and children are being assassinated or killed every single day, it seems like. In North Carolina and Virginia, just recently, a couple of days ago, this happened. A brother was executed in his front yard with his hands on the steering wheel. He didn't fight, didn't fuss or flee. Can you just, I know, and we're wrapping up this hour, but what does that say to you in the compensatory form so that we can stay in that compensatory mode? That's not the word I'm looking for, but constructive mode. What can you say about that, or have to say about that, to keep us focused?
Compensatory logic says to keep us focused, we should always think of ourselves as prisoners of war. Don't ever let that get out of your mind. We're already in the middle of a war. We're in a war, W-A-R. All of us, everybody, white and non-white, we are in a war. The war. What's this war? What is this war? A war between those who believe in white supremacy and those who don't. We were born in the war. And all of the black people who are on the planet now were born in a prisoner of war camp, which is what the planet Earth is for black people in the system of white supremacy. So we are born in prison. We've never been out of prison. Now, so if you think of yourself as a prisoner of war, every minute of every day, you can expect to get killed because that's what happens to prisoners of war. I mean, the prison guards can just walk around there, if you've read about or seen movies about or seen pictures of prisoners who are prisoners of war. Anybody can shoot you anytime they won't get ready, who is in authority to do so. They just walk up and shoot you. They don't have to explain anything. If you've seen movies like Schindler's List, you've seen depictions of that.
Yeah.
In a war, that's what happens. In POW camps, anybody that knows or has read about or has an idea about what a POW camp, which is what the whole world is for a person who has color in his or her skin, you're in a POW camp. You are a prisoner of war. So
all righty.
Terrible things are supposed to happen to you in a prisoner of war camp.
All right.
You have to get rid of the camp.
Sorry, Mr. Fuller, to cut you off, but I got to leave it there because we have to close out this first hour. Okay, everybody, you have been listening to the first hour of the Counter Racist Code Show, the CRCS, with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. Hopefully they'll have that up so you can review the second hour if you'd like to. But we have another hour coming up here. So for those who have to go in the first hour, we thank you for all of your calls and all of your participation in the shows. If any mistakes were made, and I know I made many, I do apologize for that. I will try to get better. But for those of you who are hanging on, and we have many, stay tuned for the second hour of the Counter-Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., which will begin in 7 seconds. Thank you. Okay, welcome to the second hour of the Counter-Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. I am your co-host, Mr. Bobby. If you'd like to get in contact with the show, you can do so by calling 516-453-9921. And when you do that, be sure to, if you have a question, depress the number 1 button and you will get in line so that Mr. Fuller can answer your question. I would ask, please, ma'am, please, sir, that you be concise with your question so that Mr. Fuller can understand it and answer it in an appropriate manner and time frame. You can also Gmail me at the numero 7, Mr. Bobby, BOBBY, at gmail.com. It probably will not be read today, but you can do that, and at a certain time or another show, perhaps it will be read. Chat room is available, and there are a lot of people on the chat room or in the chat room, and they are having a good time in there. Okay, Swah, we see you down there. Okay, let's go to the 937 in the Gem City called Dayton, Ohio. And David, you're on with Mr. Fuller. What is your question?
How you doing, Mr. Bobby, Mr. Fuller?
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, great. I got a question. So what should we be looking for when we looking for the refined white supremacist? And another question. And
wait a minute. Let Mr. Fuller answer that question there. Okay. Mr. Fuller?
What should we be looking for in the refined white supremacists?
Yeah.
Well, the refined white supremacists are described in the textbook for victims of white supremacy. They are the ones who don't use the N-word, and they never use it, and they talk against those who do use it, and they are always saying that they are the friends of black people. They want to be around black people. They want to adopt black people, whatever black people are doing. They want to be a part of it and whatnot. That's one type of refined white supremacist. The refined white supremacist, basically, is the white supremacist who comes across as a friend. But he's really, or she, is really a white supremacist.
Mm-hmm.
But they do not behave in that manner. So you just suspect that they are the refined white supremacists, the white supremacists who are not obvious, who don't make their contempt and their willing to be white supremacists obvious. In fact, they will say that I don't have a racist bone in my body. That's a cliche saying among many of the refined white supremacists. Oh, no, not me. No, I like black people. I was raised up around black people. I mean, in fact, a black woman raised me. As a child. Oh, yes, I don't have any. No, you won't find that in me and whatnot. But they are hiding the fact that they are indeed the refined white supremacists. In wartime terms, you call them spies. Okay, basically.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what's your second question there, David?
And it seems like, and why do black people, they like being mistreated under white supremacy? They seem like they kind of enjoy it or something. It's something weird. And that's the question. I'm just saying. It just seems like they enjoy it. I don't want to talk to them. I'm like, man, okay.
Black people enjoy misery. We make each other miserable. I mean, what we call having fun is saying something derogatory to each other. And we laugh. Everybody likes to laugh at putting somebody down and all like that. See, we have been taught to be a terrible people. This is terrible as we can get, and we have turned out to be just that. But we don't recognize that in ourselves. We've been that way so long. Now, among black people is what we call black culture. Everything derogatory. Nothing that's going to be uplifting. Nothing that's going to be inspiring to do something of constructive value. What we brag about in what we call black culture is everything that's derogatory. And we embrace it. I mean, it's like food to us. And we, somebody questions it and all like that, and you say, well, no, you're going to question our culture? This is our culture. Yeah, this is the hood. I mean, ain't you familiar with the hood? You better get with it. You better get down with that, man. Hey, this is our lifestyle. And there's nothing about it, nothing about what you call black culture in 2021 that anybody should want to be any part of.
Mm-hmm.
That's being logical and constructive, and that's the truth.
That's the truth. All righty. Let's see here. From the chat room, Morpheus 1994 says, study and learn. Learn how to research, learn how to learn how to reason, analyze, think, learn logic, and how to be logical. And let's get on code from the chat room says this, Mr. Fuller. How do we keep from going crazy in this war?
You don't. You realize that you're in an insane system, which is a system of white supremacy, and everybody in an insane system is what? Insane. According to what? According to logic.
Logic, yeah.
If you have an insane system, you got insane people. White people are just as crazy as they can be. And black people are just as crazy as they can be because white people are just as crazy as they can be.
Yes, sir.
In the system of white supremacy, because the system of white supremacy itself is a crazy system. Anytime you set up a world government that's based on looking at a person's color and saying that person is eligible to be dominated and mistreated, and we're going to set up a world government based on that premise. That is insane. That is an affront to the creator of this universe.
Yes.
That's an insult. And it's insane. And you can't keep from being insane. It says in the textbook that I'm duty bound. If I'm ever asked, what category am I in as far as my mental state, I say I'm in an insane category. Neely Fuller, are you saying that you are crazy? Absolutely. How can I keep from being crazy? In a crazy government.
Yes, sir.
World government, born in an insane asylum. That's not an asylum.
So it doesn't offend
it ain't
you.
Cure nothing. I mean,
so it doesn't offend. I'm sorry.
Yes, you walk around and you brag about killing people. All the books in the bookstores about what? How to murder somebody.
Yes.
You turn on TV. I mean, you see monsters killing each other and all like that and stepping on people in the process. That's supposed to be the kind of world that you glorify? Violence is glorified. That's insane.
Insane.
You get medals for killing people. You don't get no medal for being a nurse saving somebody from COVID-19. Think about that, folks. You're a nurse working hard, bleary-eyed, fixing to drop dead from just exhaustion, trying to cure somebody with COVID-19 or trying to patch somebody up who's been shot 8 times. Nobody gives you a medal. There's no cheering section. Nobody knows your name. Nobody cares. But if you go somewhere and kill 15 or 20 people with a uniform on, they hang all kind of medals on your chest. And if you get killed, they give you a huge ceremony. I mean, stop all the traffic, got motorcycles. Look at that. If that's not crazy, I don't know what crazy is.
Yes, sir. All righty. Thank you very much, Mr. Fuller. Let's go to out on the West Coast. Terry, if I can get you in here. Wait a minute. Okay, Terry, good morning. You can be heard. What is your question for Mr. Fuller?
Greetings, Mr. Bobby. Greetings, Mr. Neely Fuller. This is Swa. Must have been a mix-up.
This is Terry under here. Okay, Twa. I'm sorry. Swa, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So, Mr. Neely Fuller, for the past 3 weeks, I've been talking to white people who say that they want to discuss race, racism, and justice honestly. But I suspect that they were practicing deceit and racism by lying and not answering the questions from the code book that you suggest asking white people. So what should we do when white people say that they're going to be honest with us but still lie and practice racism?
What you do in any discussion, you go to page 171 and 172 of the revised, expanded textbook for victims of white supremacy. 4 wants. That's the way to start any discussion, because any discussion has to do with people, has to do, or creatures, has to do with what people want. So when you're talking to white people, you find out what they want from you, and what you want from them. It's real simple. We make it complicated. It shouldn't be head-scratching. So you just, what you do, page 171, you say, well, what I want is people to tell me the truth. Those are 2 things you can always ask white people in answer to your question. What I want from every white person that I encounter is for that white person to tell me the truth, even if it hurts. I want to know the truth about everything. Anytime you say something to me, be telling the truth. Now, the next thing, number 2, this is how you can start any conversation. I want you, talking about wants now, I want you to not withhold constructive information when you have it. Something that will help me, not hurt me. Come to me with constructive information. Don't come to me, with something that when we get engaged in it, is going to have a non-constructive result. I want to know what the constructive result's going to be. So it gets to the 4 wants. I keep saying that over and over and over again. I think people just let it run right past them. But it goes right to the core of every problem that exists among people on the planet, each and every minute of each and every day, is that we don't establish what people want. Everybody wants something every minute of the day. What do you want me to do? What do I want you to do? How do I plan for you to do what I want you to do? Or do you have a plan? What is the plan? You got to have a plan. And why do we have these wants? And then the question you always have in any interchange with anybody, whether it's a cousin or somebody down the street or somebody just met on the subway or on the bus or on the job, when you're talking to people, you want to know one main thing out of every interaction that you have with everybody. What is going to be the constructive result of you interacting with that person? Sometimes you can just go to that 4th question. Everything that we're talking about here, what's going to be the constructive result? If you're in a meeting somewhere And people are going on and on and on, hour after hour, about this and that and the other. You can just hold up your hand and ask to speak and say, look, I want to know one thing. After we get through talking, what's going to be the constructive result? Does anybody know that? Does anybody have any idea of why we're sitting here talking in the first place? Because I want to know what the constructive result is going to be out of everything that we say we are trying to do. Otherwise, why are we here?
Okay.
Why are we here? We're here to satisfy wants, W-A-N-T-S. So whatever we want to do should produce a constructive result.
Yes, sir.
And if it's not going to produce a constructive result, why are we here? And that should be universal and on everybody's mind all day, every day, as of this minute from now on. Those two words, constructive result. Keep that in mind.
Yes, sir.
Everybody should keep that in mind. Constructive result.
Thank you, Swa, and I will keep you on the line here. Let me just see here. Almost clicked you off. Got 7 things I got to do here. First of all, shout out to Moon Pie. Hey, thank you for trying to keep a straight, Moon Pie, because I'm telling you right now, the usual suspects seem to be in play on my screen, but we'll do the best we can. Imani in, Miami Gardens, Jay in Fort Worth, Sam in Colorado, and then I have 3 other people who have questions, but I don't have your name down on my screen, so you may want to give your name to the call screener so we can try to get you in. Let's do this from Frank E., Mr. Fuller. He says this: we are prisoners of war when looking out for ourselves, our escape from this system. Should we try, or are we in a position to even help someone else? Justice denied to someone is justice denied to everyone. I believe Native Americans, to some extent, are in a worse predicament compared to other people of color. Will we ever get deliverance in turn, since none is pushing their cause? Mr. Fuller?
We need a code. That's the answer. We need a code, which means a way of going about doing everything that gets the most constructive results. That's what a code is. That's the one thing we don't have, and we haven't even attempted to have one, to manufacture one. The white supremacists manufactured a code, the code of white supremacy. What makes you stronger as a white supremacist and not weaker? Once you set your goal to be a white supremacist. So they invented a code for all 9 areas of activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And there's a white supremacist code for what they do and don't do in each one of those 9 areas of activity. What you say and what you don't say in each one of those 9 areas of activity is the most successful enterprise among people ever invented, called the system of white supremacy. The most powerful, the most, quote, unquote, highly regarded. Now, non-white people don't have anything similar to that. Why? Because we never thought we needed one. And that is the one thing we definitely need. You need a counter code to counter the code that is already in place, the white supremacist code. And that means we have to have an exact way of saying things and an exact way of not saying things, words that we just don't say, things that we don't put that combination of words together at all, and things that we do and things that we don't do that counters the system of white supremacy. That's what the textbook for victims is designed to help us do.
Right, which we can get at producejustice.com.
That we get by producejustice.com.
Okay.
That's what I've written. The start of starting us on the way to having a code. Like VGQ, that's a code. I can't violate that code. That's our code. A suggestion. These are suggestions. And you can try them, and if they work and produce constructive results, that's it. That's when it becomes officially a code.
Yes, sir.
When it produces constructive results.
Alrighty. 786 is the area code, and we're going to cue in Imani, and you are on to Mr. Fuller. You can be heard. Go ahead, please.
Greetings, Mr. Fuller, Mr. Bobby.
Yes, sir.
Everyone. My question to Mr. Fuller is rendering aid and or saving the life of a warden or a correctional officer, meaning white people in general, I'm talking about, in this war. Should non-white people who are victims of these people render aid, something as simple as a 75-year-old white woman asking me to pull something off of a shelf in a grocery store, or saving the life of a white person. I submitted for about 30 years to render aid towards people, which would include white people, as a first responder. But is it codified, counter-racist codified, for all non-white people to render aid and or save a life of a white person who is suspected as a racist? Thank you.
Yes. We're supposed to be trying to make the entire universe much better than the way that we found it. We're supposed to be the pioneers. We're supposed to be the people who believe in justice, which means guaranteeing that nobody's mistreated and guaranteeing that the person that needs help the most gets the most constructive help. So if you see or you have a concept of what's constructive, well, you give that person aid. If you see people that look like them, giving people that look like you aid of some type. So that's the law of compensation. Somebody does something for you, you say, well, somebody came here and, hey, I had fallen down and I couldn't get up, and a white person came and helped me get on my feet, and called the ambulance or whatever. I mean, they got on the cell phone and called the ambulance for me. And, a white lady happened to come by, and I was laying over there in the grass. I couldn't get up. I don't know what was wrong with me. I just suddenly got weak. I collapsed. I couldn't breathe. Okay? So she happened to come by and saw that I was in distress. So she got on her cell phone, called an ambulance. And the people who came on the ambulance, 2 white guys, they ran over there and got me up out of the grass. Gave me excellent care. Now, you've witnessed that, or seen it, or heard about it. So you say, hey, the law of compensation, they did that for me, I do that for them. Even in this prison camp, this POW camp that I'm in, that happened. So I saw that happen, or I experienced that happen, or it happened to someone that I knew or was kin to me and whatnot. So absolutely, yes. Help the person that needs help the most right there in front of you. Why? For one thing, the creator of this universe will put black people to a test. So you get in the habit of mistreating people when they're down and out or when they're weak. You'll keep doing that. Whatever you start out doing, you'll keep doing it. It's called habit. You get in the habit of doing it. You start out robbing people, most likely you're going to keep doing that. You ain't going to stop until something stops you. So you get help in the direction that you're going. So if you start thinking in terms of making the world the type of place that it ought to be, any indication that you see that somebody else is willing to go in that direction, you do the same thing in kind. Okay? So in answer to the question, yes. As you say under the title of first responder, your word should be some good. You say you're going to do that, you do that. You say, yes, I'm going to give maximum help. Say, well, the person is mumbling and saying the N-word while they're frothing at the mouth and whatnot. They were going through some type of spell, and they were using the N-word while they were doing it, while I was putting them in an ambulance. Now, I am the first responder, putting them in the ambulance. And they're calling me that name. Get your hands off me. See? It's all coming out, what they're really thinking, because they think I'm trying to harm them or something. So they're calling me the N-word. But I say, well, sure, but I'm thinking about myself. Now, the person is in this state. The person has lost an arm. The person is in pain. And the person is screaming and yelling at me and calling me the N-word and don't want me to put my hands on them. But because I said that I am a first responder and I'm going to keep my word in trying to help people, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. I'm going to give this person maximum help.
Okay. All righty. Let's go to Jay in Fort Worth. Let's see, Jay, if I can get you in. Thank you, Imani, for your call. Jay in, wait a minute. There you go. Jay in Fort Worth. You're on with Mr. Fuller. What is your question?
Yes, sir. Good morning, Mr. Bobby. I do want to stay on the line.
Okay, you got to speak up, though, so I can hear you.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Fuller.
Good morning, sir.
I want to say a quick VGQ before I ask my question. And my VGQ is to Mr. Fuller. I just want to tell you that I appreciate you writing the code, and I've been using some of the methods of thought, speech, and or action. And I was in a conversation with my sister the other day, and we were talking about some of the police shootings and things of that nature. And I thought about Mr. Fuller because I was speaking from a position of truth. And I was trying to be logical and practical about the situation while talking to my sister, who I've shared text from the code with all the time. And I was explaining to her that constructive and non-constructive. And being constructive, you choose people who you allow to be in your life, whether it's a male, female, and you produce kids in a constructive and non-constructive situation. So, all that being said, I recognize some people don't recognize white supremacy and some people do. So, it's constructive to keep those people in your circle, and it's constructive to keep the people that don't recognize it away from your circle. So my question is this, Mr. Fuller. Is it true, in order to produce justice, we must first produce the individuals to carry out the justice? An example, our children, the people that we come in contact with. Since we have the right to choose who we allow in our space, wouldn't that be constructive to choose a woman to produce constructive children with versus choosing people to make kids that's non-constructive in the system that we already face?
Hold it right there, Jay. Hold it, Mr. Fuller. Jay, I have to take a station break, but what I would like for you to do while I'm giving this station break is to condense your question so that Mr. Fuller can answer it, please.
I got you.
Okay, you're listening to the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. I am the co-host, Mr. Bobby. If you would like to call in to the show, you can by calling this number, 516-453-9921. And when you do, ma'am, when you do, sir, press the number 1 button and you will get in line so that you can ask your question. And we would ask that you would be concise with your questions and not long. You can also Gmail me, although it will not be read on today's show, but that address is the numeral number 7, Mr. Bobby, BOBBY, at gmail.com. And write me a letter, not a novel, but a letter, and then I will attempt to read it with my mistakes and all. The chat room is available. Occasionally I'll have an opportunity to read a few of the chats that's going on in there, but you're welcome to go in there and participate in the chat room. And remember, all the materials that Mr. Fuller is speaking about will come from the book that he has written, The United Compensatory Code System Concept, and you can get that by going to producejustice.com. Okay, let's go back to Jay. Jay, thank you for waiting. Go ahead and rephrase that question for Mr. Fuller.
No problem. So my VGQ was just basically about truth, which Mr. Fuller speaks about all the time. Mr. Fuller talks about telling the truth all the time. And so I was having a conversation with another person of color, and I was telling her that the truth is black people, we are sometimes our own worst enemy because we choose to produce other non-constructive situations with people by being around them. And that's the reason why Mr. Fuller put in his code that you stay away from other people no matter what color they are. If they're not doing something constructive, you avoid these people. You choose to just stay away from people who don't recognize white supremacy and the effects of it. So my question was, is it true in order to produce justice, we must first produce the individuals to carry out the justice, our children, the people that we influence the most?
Okay, Mr. Fuller?
You're being influenced simply by saying that we need a code, and here again, page 171, 172 of the revised expanded of the textbook. Everybody that you encounter, you don't have to divide people up in any kind of way. I mean, because you can't anyway. I mean, people are just people, and everybody makes mistakes. Some people make more mistakes than others. Some people are doing things they shouldn't be doing. We're all doing things we shouldn't be doing because we're in a system of white supremacy where everybody's doing something they shouldn't be doing. So that means you can't seal yourself off from the world because you're in the world. You're in this prison camp. You're in this prison camp with prison masters and prisoners. There's no way to escape that. So what you do is just codify your behavior so that anytime you're around someone, you go to those questions. Is this going to produce a constructive result? That's the bottom line question. And anything that you do right today, on this particular day, in the year 2021, I mean this day right now, this minute right now, if you're in proximity to someone, if you're near someone, doesn't make any difference who the person is, white or non-white. The key thing to keep in mind is this constructive. This thing that you're talking about, sir, or ma'am, or this thing you're talking about doing, or that you have done, or that you want to do, or that you want me to do, or that you're fixing to do. Is it going to produce a constructive result, yes or no? Because there's no such thing as in between. It's either going to be constructive or non-constructive. And that's the essence of the entire compensatory counter-racist code. constructive, non-constructive, regardless of what people you're around and when. Because most of the time you're going to be around people that you didn't choose to be around. So what do you do then? That's got to be codified. So it's the same code regardless, constructive, non-constructive. And you just raise your hand to the person, or just ask the person, say, can I ask you this question? And the person say, yes. Say, this thing that you're talking about doing, is it going to produce a constructive result or a non-constructive result? Which?
Okay. All righty. Thank you there, Jay. Let's go to, it looks like it's Sam on my screen. Sam in Colorado. Good morning. You can be heard. And what is your question for Mr. Fuller?
How you doing? I just want to say I do want to stay on the line.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, turn me off. Okay. Mr. Fuller, the definition used for justice, may I use that? I'm part of a group that's talking about trying to produce equity amongst, particularly in the farm, the agricultural world. I'm wondering if I may reference your definition of justice.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be used. But always say where you got it. That eliminates what? Does that embellish Neely Fuller? No, that's not the purpose. That's to eliminate confusion. Because a lot of people's definition for justice is not the same as what I had in the textbook for victims of white supremacy. Justice being guaranteeing that no person is mistreated and guaranteeing that the person that needs help the most gets the most constructive help. Now, it's never been done, but that is the goal. That is the goal, to replace all these systems that are not producing that interaction between people, guaranteeing that no one is mistreated and guaranteeing that the person that needs help the most gets the most constructive help. So you just quote that and say where you got it from. Textbook for victims of white supremacy, and then ask the people, do they think that that's constructive to have that type of definition? You always ask that question so that everybody will be on the same page. Otherwise, you got what? Confusion. That's the one thing you don't want.
Mm-hmm.
Or you got an argument. That's another thing you don't want. Arguments don't do anything except lead to other arguments.
Okay.
You want a conversation.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Let's go to Emmerich Lamumba in Georgia. Let me see here if I can get you in here. Okay, Emmerich, and you can be heard. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Good morning, Mr. Bobby, Mr. Fuller.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Still learning. Yes, sir. My question is concerning the. Well, I have two parts. The first part of it is concerning Micaiah Bryant, the young lady that was killed by the Columbus Police Department. And the question I have for Mr. Fuller is, I know we have the code, don't fuss, fight, or flee, and I was trying to have this conversation with another non-white member, another black member, was about whenever the suspected white supremacists or suspected race soldiers pull up, any black person or any non-white person with a weapon can be gunned down, and more than likely in the system of white supremacy is going to be gunned down. And my first question for Mr. Fuller is, because it reminded me of a situation where I went to a graduation party that started off to be a constructive result. I thought it would have a constructive result, but two females ended up getting a fight at that party. And the suspected race soldiers were called in the same manner. No one was killed, but weapons were pulled out. Confusion was all over the place. So my question for Mr. Fuller is, as long as the system of white supremacy exists and black people are full of poison, should we avoid all large gatherings of non-white people, even if we think it's a constructive result, like a graduation party or your grandmother's birthday party?
Okay, Mr. Fuller?
Everything, that word party is among black people solidly. But we should examine black people. When we start talking about what can black people do, how can we improve things? Our habits. Partying is a habit. And we need to examine everything that goes on at a party and ask that bottom line question: what's constructive about this? That's family reunions and all of it. I mean, anytime black people, so-called, quote, unquote, get together, you want to know what's going to be the constructive result. Otherwise, don't have it. Now, that's going to be real painful. That's going to be real painful for black people. But we need to make some major changes. These little minor changes we've been making all down to the centuries have not worked. And we need to get rid of a whole bunch of stuff that we are doing and get rid of it wholesale. I'm talking about throw it, the whole thing out the window. You say, well, black people don't have parties. You better believe we don't. We ain't eligible to be having parties in the traditional way that we have been having them. We need to stop having them altogether.
Okay. What's your second
that would
question?
be a real painful change. But, you know, when you go to a dentist, the dentist will say you're going to feel some pain. But this abscess tooth, I mean, I got to work on it. Or you're going to get a whole lot more pain, which is what black people get when they have parties. All right?
Wow.
Right. You say, well, it doesn't happen all the time. Well, yeah, but it happens too many times that we need to look at the nomenclature, how a so-called party is put together, and go through each and every detail of what constitutes a black party and ask yourself, is this necessary in order for people to be the type of people that we ought to be on this planet? Is this thing that we call a black party necessary? And if it ain't necessary to produce the most constructive results that you will ever see in your entire existence, scrap it.
Wow.
Yes,
what's your second question there, Emmerich? Because we're short on time.
Yes, sir. Okay, I'm going to get it out quickly. It's just, Mr. Fuller, could you please, for all of us, could you please tell us why, I know VGQ was to prevent black people from arguing, but could you please elaborate to us how we all are cooning? I know we shouldn't call people names, because I was called a coon just by saying don't fuss, fight, or flee. So could you please explain to us how we all are cooning in the system of white supremacy? Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Because we are in the system of white supremacy. So when you're in the system of white supremacy, the prison system, go back to that prison analogy again, that's where we all are. Now, that statement that I just made is either true or false. Every person who is classified as black and or non-white is in a prison called the system of white supremacy. So we are prisoners of war. Prisoners of war are in a terrible situation. And in that situation, we have all the characteristics of prisoners of war. We picket each other because what else would we find to do? Milling around in the prison yard. What are prisoners going to do? A lot of little trivial stuff. Childlike stuff. Look at the movie Shawshank Redemption. I usually use that as an example, as a small example. Maybe the movie Schindler's List. That's on my list of movies because it shows what being in a prison is like, how people act in prison. In the movie Shawshank Redemption, you have little groups of people. They form little groups. To do what? To evaporate the prison? No. to go after each other. They have what you call prison gangs. That's all they plot on doing. Why? Because their world is so small. There's nothing else that they think about doing. I mean, they sit around all day just looking at each other, everybody in the same uniform, which comes to racism, black people's skin. We're all sitting around, bunch of slaves at the bottom of the ship, chained together. So what will we do? Kind of show out to each other. We show off my chains are shinier than your chains. No, they ain't. Yes, they is. No, they ain't. Yes, they is. Then we start doing what? Fighting. And then the prison master comes down the ladder and whips us both in the line and said, get back over there where you're supposed to be sitting. And they go back up the ladder. Nothing has changed. That's black people's situation all over the world. We're just a bunch of prisoners, a bunch of little children, boxed together, wearing chains. And we don't have anything else to do except go at each other because we don't have anything else to do. We're not allowed to do anything else that makes sense.
Okay.
Because we're not supposed to in the system of white supremacy. So it's always an explanation for people's behavior. It's just a matter of just looking at it. The whole picture, not just part of the picture.
Yes, sir. Okay, this is what I'm going to do here. And thank you, by the way, my brother. I'm going to try to get Terry in if I can, but I don't. Oh, okay. I'm going to try it again. Here I go. It says Terry at the 213. This looks like Swall's number, but I'm going to try it as I was told. Let me see here. Okay, now it says Terry, but this looks like Swall's number.
Yeah, it's Swaw again.
Okay.
I don't have a question.
Well, wait a minute, Terry. Wait a minute, Swaw. You're going to have to hold that one because they just told me it was
I don't have a question. I don't have one.
Okay. Yeah, but I'm going to keep you listening, though. Okay. All right. Boy, technology. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Okay, but I'll try to get you in, Swat, if we can get these in here real quick. Let's go to John. John in Houston. You're there.
Good morning, guys. I just would like to know Mr. Fuller's definition of entrapment because I don't see it in the word guide. Just the word entrapment.
Okay. Mr. Fuller?
Yes, what was the question?
He said that. Go ahead, John. Go ahead and repeat your question.
How do you, if you were to put it into the word guide, define the word entrapment?
How do I find a way to do what?
How do you define the word entrapment?
Entrapment?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I don't have that word in the word guide, so I didn't find it necessary to do so. So you can just use the dictionary definition. That's according to the law of compensation. If you don't see it in the word guide, just go to whatever English dictionary you have and just use that for what it is. Or if you want to use the word in a different way, do so. You're not limited just because it's not in any dictionary or you didn't hear Neely Fuller say it. You can look at the word entrapment and say, I think I'm going to use the word entrapment in a different way from the way everybody's always used it. Why? Why would you do that? Because you think it may produce a more constructive result. So the code says, because I've done it, that's why I have a word guide. You can take a word, and if you're not satisfied with the way that word is being used, you can take that same English word, if it is in English, and give it a new definition, a definition that you think will work best for what you're trying to do. Why? Because under compensatory logic, a word is nothing but a tool. A tool for doing what? Whatever it is you're trying to do.
Okay.
It's like going into a hardware store. And you say, I'm looking for a tool that will do this and that and the other on my new motorcycle. And they say, well, we don't have a tool like that. But we have an item over here that, looks like what you're looking for, but it's not made for that. And you look at it and you say, well, I'll take it because I'm going to modify it because on this special part I have on my motorcycle, I know how to take it and use it for that purpose. After I put a few things to it, or after I carve something off of it, or melt something off of it, I think I can use this. So a word is the same way. It's nothing but a way of getting things done. So you're not limited in how you use any word. So you want to take the word entrapment and use it in a different way or define it in a different way. You just make that official by saying, this is the way I'm using it. That's the compensatory way. In fact, the textbook for victims of white supremacy advocate that you do this all the time if it's necessary to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You should do it.
Thank you, John. I'm going to keep you on the line. I was told that Terry from D.C., but I don't have you on the screen. Terry, give your information to the call screener, and then we'll try to get you on first or second next week, along with Diva 2, which I just contacted. But let's go right here to Rainbow in Maryland, see if we can get you in here. Okay, there you go, Rainbow.
Hey, Mr. Bobby, Mr. Fuller.
Good morning.
I have two questions. My first question is, yesterday I was having a conversation with my niece, who's 20 years old, and she was detailing some events that happened the previous day. And I became angry with her. I started yelling at her, which I later apologized for. But my question is, how do you go about talking to young people who think the world has changed and that adults just want to, or older adults just want to project their experiences onto them?
You go to the wants again. I mean, in the middle of all the back and forth, and this happens. I mean, you can look forward to that happening. That's going to continue to happen. But when you find yourself doing it, just say, okay, wait a minute. Let's stop right now. What is it you want to do? Why do you want to do it? How do you plan to do it? And what do you expect the constructive result to be? Now, that's in the textbook for victims of white supremacy, page 171 and 172. Anytime you get lost in anything, anytime there's confusion, anytime there's an argument, you can always go to those four wants. Or it might be, what do you want me to do? First of all, you ask the person that you're talking to, what do they want to do? Because that's the most important thing. They're going to want to do something. Whatever you all were talking about, it has to do with a want. So she wanted you not to talk about things that had happened in the past. That's what you just said. And so you will ask her then, why? If it's constructive. Because it all comes down to that fourth question. What is going to be the constructive result of what you want to do if it's done?
Okay.
Or what is going to be the constructive result of what it is if it's something she wants you to do? You want to know what the constructive result is going to be. And that, I mean, when you get to that constructive result, I mean, everything should freeze right there in that answer. I mean, it ain't going to be too much to say after that. because everything is about being constructive. And a person is not likely to disagree with something that's been proven to be constructive without sounding like they don't want to be constructive.
Okay, Terry, we got about 2 minutes. Go ahead. Rainbow. I'm sorry. We got about 2 minutes. What is your second question, quickly?
So thank you, Mr. Bobby. My second question is, what is the difference between a non-white person actually going to the armed forces and versus being a prisoner of war?
Well, you're a prisoner of war anyhow, and you're going into the armed forces. It's just something like you're already in a prison, and the prison masters say, we're going to put you in a category where you're going to help guard the prison. So that's what you do, because you're still in prison. So if they give you an option now of whether you have to do it, that's up to you. I have been in uniform, 2 of them. Air Force, they called it, and Army. Drafted into the Army, sent to Korea, spent 10 months in the combat zone. I volunteered for the Air Force on account of, after I got out of the Army, saved 4 years, for example, giving myself as an example. But on account of job situation and money situation, desperation, I went into the Air Force, volunteered. But I went in with it in mind, well, at this time, from what I hear, they'll probably put me somewhere where I'll just be working, doing some lifting and loading, or doing some kind of office work. And it turned out to be that way. Because I didn't figure they're going to put me in an airplane and have me dropping bombs on people and people shooting at me. I wasn't going to be nowhere around that at that time, and it turned out to be that way. I was just shuffling papers and whatnot, which is okay with me. But a person might say, yeah, and you're helping that prison system called the system of white supremacy. Well, I'm doing that anywhere I am anyway. Because if you're black and on this planet, you are helping the system of white supremacy. That's why they call it white supremacy. White supremacy. Supreme over all black people, everywhere, regardless of what they're doing.
Okay. All right. Well, Rainbow from Maryland, thank you very much. And don't be a stranger. Listen, Joe from Harlem, I'm not going to get you in for this week because we simply have run short of time. We only got 1 minute and 30 seconds left. But call in next week, and I'll make sure that you get in first, second, or third. The same way with you, Terry, from D.C. They said you were on here, but I couldn't find you. But you call in, and we'll give you some priority. And Diva, too, the same way with you with your questions. We will try to get them in. Mr. Fuller, so thank you. Mr. Fuller, we got 1 minute and 8 seconds before we have to close the show out. An ending comment before we have to close it out?
Just go to producejustice.com and get the textbook for victims of white supremacy and thumb through it. I don't recommend that people try to read it straight through. Just pick it up and read different passages from day to day or during the day or wherever you happen to be, riding to work or whatever. I mean, and just see if you see something you can use. See something that will kindle a thought, that will lead to another thought, that will lead to another thought. To do what? To problem solve. Because that's basically what the book is supposed to be about. Go to producejustice.com.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Fuller, so much. Thank you, callers, for so much. We had a few bugs today, but that is to be expected. We'll try to work them out, and we will try to do better next week because, you know, everything is full of mistakes, including me. So thank you, Mr. Fuller. Thank you, callers, all the people in the chat room, and all the callers. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fuller.